Welcome to another episode of Forbidden Films.
This is a podcast about the movies they won't make anymore. I'm Barry Germansky, a film producer.
And I'm Wayne Kramer, a writer and director. Today we're talking about A Clockwork Orange. And A Clockwork Orange is a film that I've been obsessed with since I was 10, 11, 12. Because growing up in South Africa, it was banned outright, and it was considered one of the most notorious films. And of course, me hearing that a movie was notorious or dangerous immediately got my attention. And then I was starting to see images from the movie because I used to see the record cover at record stores. And eventually I saved up enough money and bought the gatefold record of the soundtrack, I should say, which opens up in the middle and has all these fairly explicit pictures, photographs from the film. And it intrigued me even more, including specifically the cover, which was this beautiful Philip Castle painting of Malcolm McDowell as Alex, leaning through the A of A Clockwork Orange. And it took me quite a few years to realize that was the A. It was always like, just says Clockwork Orange. Where's the A?
It's very clever.
To this day, it was very clever. And to this day, I still think it's probably my favorite movie poster alongside Jaws in terms of the brilliance of the imagery, telling you what the movie will be and then delivering on it. And I couldn't figure out, what was so fascinating to me was I couldn't figure out who this character was, because it was this guy with this long eyelash on his right eye, holding a knife, wearing like a jump and a bowler hat. It was so transgressive to me, yet for reasons I couldn't even understand. And I was hearing from people who had been overseas and had seen the movie, or at that time, there were these so-called black homelands in South Africa. Those weren't the black homelands yet, but there were countries outside of South Africa where they showed the movie and attracted like white tourism. And I believe they had casinos and topless cabarets and things like that. And people would go there, see Clockwork Orange, come back, and there'd be conversation about it. Plus, I was reading about it in the mostly British film magazines that I used to subscribe to. And I had no way of knowing how to see this movie, because there was a woman who drove around Johannesburg with 16mm prints of these banned films in her car. But they were very, very expensive to hire. And I was a kid and I didn't have the means of contacting her. I would hear about people who saw it that way on 16mm, and I was very envious of them. But it seemed to me that it was going to be a long time before I could ever see A Clockwork Orange, possibly if I traveled overseas. But again, my family didn't have much money, so we never did anything like international vacations. And then along comes Betamax and VHS. And that was a game changer for people who couldn't get access to these films in South Africa, because now they started to be duplicated out of the UK, because the UK has shared the same television system, which was PAL, versus the US, which used NTSC and was not compatible with South African video recorders. So these movies started to slowly filter into the country. And you used to have to know the right person who maybe had a copy of a copy of a copy. And I had a bar mitzvah when I was 13 years old. And most kids, when they have a bar mitzvah, they get a lot of money from families and friends. Not an excessive amount of money, but it's money you're supposed to, like most normal Jewish kids would be encouraged to put it in a savings account or an investment account. But of course, no, I saw this as an opportunity to get a VHS player. So I convinced my parents that I should put all my bar mitzvah money into getting this JVC top-loading VHS player, which was my pride and joy. And the thing cost over what would have been $1,000, because at that time, I think the South African currency, the rand, was pretty equivalent to the US dollar. So I got this thing, and of course, tapes were very expensive at that time. I mean, just one VHS tape, a 2-hour VHS tape, or I think there were 3-hour tapes available as well, were like 20, 25 rand. I mean, that's like if you wanted to I don't even know what it's comparable today, because we don't really much use a blank anything. We're all digital. But it was like buying a movie. every time you wanted one. Like today's 4K releases have become very expensive again. It's like buying laser discs. They're now 40, 50, $60. So it
So
was
which was the
equivalent of,
first movie that
that.
you bought?
Well, there wasn't a market to buy anything, is what I'm saying, but blank tapes cost that much. So I actually think A Clockwork Orange was the first movie because I went to this gym not far from my house, and I used to strike up conversations with some of the older guys there because I was one of the younger guys in the gym there. I was doing some rehabilitation on my knee, and then I started to get a little bit more into bodybuilding. And there was a guy there, and he saw, and I was always talking about movies and movies I wanted to see, and I was always talking about, for some reason, A Clockwork Orange. So this guy I'd been talking to for weeks. I can't really remember what it was that he actually did. But he finally said to me, I can get you a copy of A Clockwork Orange. And he said, but it's expensive. It'll cost you about $50. So that's like, I mean, the equivalent of $50 or 50 Rand back in, talking about 1978, I think. That's probably like $500 or something.
Wow.
So I scraped the money together. I don't know how I did it, really. I maybe took the remnants of what was left of my bar mitzvah money, for all I know. And I actually didn't believe this guy was going to come through. And my parents weren't happy at all when I told them I was expecting a copy of A Clockwork Orange because it was like saying, hey, mom and dad, I'm buying some heroin tonight. So if there's a knock on the door, don't be too alarmed. So anyway, the guy turns up in my house. He presents me with a VHS tape. I don't even test, or maybe I did test it. I think I went over to the VHS player, I stuck it in, and the opening of the movie comes on with Malcolm McDowell in the Korova Milk Bar, and it's like fourth generation. It's like blurry. But for me, it was the clearest, best version of Clockwork Orange I've ever seen in my life, because it was
Yeah,
me
I can
finally getting
imagine.
to see the movie. It didn't matter if it was 10 generations and was skipping and doing everything. I finally had access to the movie. So I happily paid the guy, and he went off, and I think I watched it by myself because I didn't even want anybody in the room with me. I wanted to just suck this up. There was no way I wasn't going to love this movie. It had been preordained that I was going to love this film. And to this very day, it resides in my top 10 favorite movies for so many reasons, many of which we'll get into. And just to foreshadow this, I had actually read Anthony Burgess's novel at this point because the novel was not banned in South Africa. And the novel itself is not very salacious. So it was for sale in a normal local bookstore. And when I saw it, I thought, oh my God, I can read A Clockwork Orange and I can find out more about what this story is about. And was actually a good thing I'd read the novel because it exposed me to the slang in the book, which Kubrick uses quite judiciously in the movie. He uses a fair amount of it, but always with the image showing you what they're referring to for the most part, I felt.
Yes.
And the first time, and the book when I got it actually had a glossary in the back of translations of what the NAD said was. But then over the years, I did see copies of the book that didn't have that. And I always imagined, how the hell could anybody read this book? But by the time I saw the movie, I had a fair understanding of some of the main words that would be used. So I finally got to see A Clockwork Orange. I was young, and I definitely expected the film to be a lot more explicit and darker and more violent than what I ended up seeing. And even this was, I mean, back in 1978, and I had not been exposed to a lot of the more notorious films. But
So what had you seen at that point that was, let's say, more explicit or that you felt was more controversial than A Clockwork Orange?
Well, I had seen, I mean, it's a funny, weird story that, again, in itself would probably never happen again today. But pornography was hugely banned in South Africa, outlawed. It was so it was almost mythologized that if someone had a porn movie, and before VHS came along, there were these older, I want to say they were an old Philips system of videotape that had been available in the country to wealthier people. And I just have this memory of them having these big, thick tapes as opposed to what VHS or Betamax was. And I think it was at the gym again that I met this guy who said he could get me behind the green door because I was fascinated. I'd heard a lot about behind the green door, and I thought, oh, okay. He said it'll cost you 150 Rand. So let me know when you want it. And so, of course, I started corralling all my friends at school saying, hey, we could see a porn movie. Let's all pool together this money and we can get this movie and you'll come and watch it in my house in the afternoon. My father knew nothing about it because he would have killed me. My mother was, well, okay, I'm just going to let him do it. But she literally had no idea what a porn movie was. She thought it was softcore kind of stuff.
I see.
So on the day, the guy turns up and he goes, well, guess what? I couldn't get you behind the green door because it wasn't available or something. So we've got this other one for you. I'm sure you'll like it. It's a hardcore porn film. It turned out to be a film not many people ever talk about and know about, but it did come out on DVD in the US. It was called Teenage Twins. And it was about these promiscuous twin sisters, and I think they were real twins, who would have sex with everybody. And so, to answer your question, I had seen a hardcore porn movie already,
I see.
and I had all my friends over, which was a very harrowing experience because anytime there was a knock on the door, we literally all thought the Vice Squad was coming to get us. And in those days, if the Vice Squad caught you with a porn movie, you were threatened with reform school, definitely going to be caned, the whole number. So it was there were consequences to it. It wasn't like getting scolded. Many years later, and I will go into, many years later, I'll tell this story quickly as well. Now, I was building a fairly substantial VHS library of all the films I wanted to see. I had many normal releases that I would rent and record or swap with friends, but I was building up a library of films that were all banned or uncensored in the country. So I had the Exorcist, Lost Tango in Paris, The Warriors, A Clockwork Orange, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That was another coveted one that I got my hands on. And I was in the equivalent of 11th grade in high school. I was going to an art school. And I told this one guy, he was a fairly new student, that I had all these movies. And he got very interested in it. And he said, I may know somebody who'll pay you if you will rent some of them to him. And I thought, I wasn't a movie pirate making money off these things. Anytime anyone ever paid me a little bit of money to rent a movie from me, it meant it was another videotape I could buy at $25 and I could include another movie in my collection.
Yes.
So I said, well, okay, if this guy wants to come and borrow or rent 10 of these titles from me, I could make a little bit of money to buy more tapes. So on the arranged day that this person was going to come over, he said it was a friend of his who was going to come over and get the tapes. I had this really bad feeling. And, I just woke up that day and thought something's not right about this. And then at the prescribed time, I look out the window and I see these two guys in suits coming up my driveway. And I thought, oh, shit, these look like cops to me.
That's horrifying.
And I'm busted. And, they rang the doorbell. The one guy who was still pretending to be, oh, I'd like to come and hire some of these movies from you. And I knew right away. And I said, they're not available, or I'm not going to do it. And the guy showed me his police badge and said, well, we've received a report and we know you have these. And they had a search warrant for my house. So they end up in my room where all my tapes were on a shelf and in my closet somewhere. And the funny thing is, they were rarely looking for E.T., because that was the time when E.T. was being heavily pirated around the world before its actual release in foreign countries and in the US. And I'm trying to remember if I had a copy of E.T. or not. I don't think I did. I think I might have even seen a pirated one, but I don't think I had one at the house. But I had everything else. And the lead cop, this warrant officer, they were cleaning out my closet and they were taking all these movies. And I should have been more deferential and
how old were you at the time?
I was 16, I think, maybe
wow,
nearly 17.
So that must have been a traumatic experience.
It was. And then I think my mom came home mid-raid and she just was like freaking out, like sobbing and crying. And what are you going to do to my son? And my father was at work still. But I got so in this cop's face because I was so angry. And I said, the South African government is fucked up for not letting us see these films. They're art and they're famous movies, and these movies have won awards, and you barging in here, and Clockwork Orange means so much to me, this film. And I said, you know what? I will have another copy by next week. So be sure to stop back and get the new copy. I was like really in this guy's face. And I
Wow.
said,
Well, I applaud you for that. That's incredible.
And I said, are you sure you don't want to check my ceiling? There could be another copy up there. And the guy started, to realize that I wasn't like a movie pirate. I was a guy who loved movies and wanted to be a filmmaker. And you could see this from the movie posters on my wall. And he kind of took pity on me in a sense and
How old
said,
was he
okay,
approximately?
this guy was I would say he's in his 40s.
Oh, okay.
And all these situations feature in my novel Blue Movies, sort of in a different way, different period, but they're all inspired by these moments. But anyway, so he took all the movies and he said, well, here's a notice to appear. Come to where he was headquartered, which was the main police precinct in Johannesburg, the notorious John Foster Square, where they interrogated all the political prisoners. And he said, come with your father and we'll work this out. And so my father took me down there. It was a day later or something. And we went into his office and he told my father, like right away, he said, calm down. Nothing bad is going to happen to your son. He says, I can see that he's not a criminal, that he's not a movie pirate. I can see that he is a filmmaker. And I'm going to do him a big favor. I'm going to get him what's called a filmmaker's license, which means he'll be able to legally get all these films back, including the banned ones and the uncensored ones. The only ones we're going to keep are the pornography. I didn't have a lot of porn. I know I had Caligula, the hardcore version, and they kept that one. And I don't sort of know any of the others they had. But he made it real. In a way, he was really cool in how he approached this. And he actually was able to return all the movies to me that I had, except for Caligula and a few others, which I soon enough got more copies from other friends I knew who already had it. But I had the more master copy versions of some of the movies I took. So if I was going to copy them all back from a friend, that would have been like 7th and 8th generation. So I was relieved to get films back, including Clockwork Orange. But what was great was now I didn't need to fear a knock on the door and the Vice Squad were going to raid my house because I had these films. And what he actually did later on, and I think I've told the story before, is he would go and raid other video stores that had banned movies that were selling out of the back, or uncensored movies. It was a Wild West. I mean, there were stores close to my school that had all these movies uncut or banned on the shelf, and they themselves didn't even know what was banned or not. They were just getting them copied out of the UK and sent over and making money. And that's where I got the uncut Dress to Kill and all kinds of stuff. But he would go and raid these stores, and then he would call me up and he would go, are you still looking for that copy of Heavy Metal? The animated one. And I'd say, yeah. And he goes, okay, I'll get you a copy. So he turned out to be a pretty good guy.
Yes. But, and that's a fascinating story, by the way.
And one other thing I wanted to mention, because of the obsession with Clockwork Orange, I said, you raid all these people's homes, you take these movies, or you confiscate them at the airport. Where do they all go? And he said, well, we got a vault downstairs where we keep them all. And he said, do you want me to show you? And I go, yeah, I want to see this. So he took me down into the basement, into this restricted room. And I swear to you, they had 35 millimeter prints there of A Clockwork Orange, or some of these notorious movies. They had official videotapes from all over the world, different versions of A Clockwork Orange. And they had the British Betamax, not the British Betamax, because it was, I don't think they, I don't even know if it got official video release in Britain, because I think Kubrick had pulled the movie at that time.
Yes.
But they had the American Betamax, and it had this great clamshell cover. And I said to him, I know you won't give me the movie, but can I have the cover? And he goes, oh yeah, sure, take the cover. So I took the cover with me. So that was like, that's how far back like my origins go with Clockwork Orange. Clockwork Orange had me arrested, you
Yeah,
know.
wow. I mean that's a movie unto itself. Wow. I mean you might have the ultimate experience watching A Clockwork Orange and then your whole extended history with it. Um but it's also interesting because you were living in a dystopia of sorts, watching
That's for
this
sure.
fictional dystopia on screen. So that also must have been an interesting experience because when I first saw Clockwork Orange in the 1990s, in a suburb just north of Toronto, it was as close to an oasis as has ever existed on the face of this earth. There wasn't a single geopolitical cloud on the horizon. There weren't any major social problems whatsoever. And when you then watch a movie like A Clockwork Orange, it's maybe frightening in a different way than you experienced because you're thinking like, could this actually happen? Right? What I'm watching here, could life ever resemble this? Whereas in your particular circumstance, you already had a dystopia around you. Granted, it was a different one than the one that is shown in the film. But the point is the fact that you have cops knocking on people's doors to seize their works of art is quite scary to me.
And it's funny how normalized it seemed in your life. It never felt okay that it was being done, but everybody just sort of lived with it. And my poor parents, I put them through hell because I was always getting movies and they were always concerned, was I going to be arrested again? And you're going to have us all thrown in prison. And my father was beside himself. Finally, censorship started to ease up in South Africa. And I think around 1983, they finally unbanned A Clockwork Orange, but they said the movie could only go to art house movie theaters in very limited run, and it was not allowed to go to videotape. And they still censored it a bit. And I remember this wasn't actually the first time I saw it in a movie theater, because a year or two earlier, I traveled to this casino resort called Sun City, which is well known for its I think it was the Paul Simon anti-apartheid song and all that. But it was this massive resort that had been opened in what was called a black homeland called Botswana. Now, it was really still part of South Africa, but the South African government, in trying to give concessions to try and create this impression that apartheid wasn't as bad as it was, or they were willing to be supportive of the black populations, they created these homelands, which, like tribal reservations in the US, were impoverished except for the people who had the buy-in on the casinos and banned movies. So that was a big thing. If you went to Sun City and you, besides gambling, or if you didn't gamble, you could go and see all these soft porn movies. There were never any hard porn movies playing, but they knew about the notoriety of A Clockwork Orange, so they released it there for a short run. And I remember seeing it in a smallish movie theater. They had theaters. They had a whole bunch of movie theaters there within the main complex. And it was the first time I was seeing it really clearly on a 35 millimeter print, which was fantastic, and was the uncensored version. But I had seen it at that point 50 times already. So it was just about seeing the presentation and the image.
Yes.
So then later on, South Africa in 83 unbanned it. But I'll remember so clearly, they censored the part where Malcolm McDowell they're doing the prison intake with him, where he's first arrested and he goes in and they're and he has to strip down his clothes and give his possessions. And at one point, he's standing and there's a box in front of him where his penis would be. And then at the last moment, they pull the box away and you can sort of see a full frontal on McDowell. And they put a black circle on the screen in front of that. Which I thought was ridiculous. Like a lot of the female nudity was in, and then also weirdly at the very end, when Alex is in the snow having sex with that blonde woman, and there's all these Victorian dressed
Yes.
reporters looking on. I think they censored a section of that, which was bizarre.
Yes.
Other than that, I think it was mostly the the full movie. And of course, everybody rushed to see this movie in South Africa because most South Africans had not had the opportunity to go to Sun City or to see pirated copies of it. And people were mostly disappointed because they thought they were going to see something very pornographic. And A Clockwork Orange is not that at all. And they thought they were going to see something very salacious. And while you can contend that the first 20 minutes or so is to some degree, it's also done in a very black comedic tone.
Yes.
And that's the thing that I never understood about this harsh reactionary response to Clockwork Orange. Like, it's the most violent movie of all time. It's this dangerous movie. It's sickening. It's disturbing because it was literally banned or heavily censored in almost every country in the world.
Well, if you're
And
comparing
I
the
was
movie, oh, go on.
no, and I always thought it was kind of cartoonish in a way. The way Kubrick presents everything. He shows in an R-rated or previously X-rated version. He shows rape and violence, but I mean, there's never any super explicit. I mean, there's nudity, but you're not seeing the equivalent of hardcore pornography that everybody
No, of course
expected was
not.
the movie.
Yeah, well, if you compare this movie or any movie that is not hardcore pornography, to hardcore pornography, there's a huge difference between the two realms. So, what I would say is that among movies that are not overtly pornographic, I do think even to this day, this is one of the most, at times, harrowing movies ever made, especially the scene where Alex and his friends break into the writer's house and then rape the wife in front of the husband.
But
I
but
think
to,
that
but
the
what I was saying, to put it into context, we're living, and I mean, this has been for many years now. I mean, there's A Clockwork Orange, and then there are movies like A Spit on Your Grave, where it's hardly, I mean, I'm loath to call it even a movie because it's a exploitation film that really doesn't have much going for it except for rape scenes. But there have been movies not long after Clockwork Orange, and at least 20, 30 years old already, that are doing this really, Last House on the Left, I
yeah.
find is a far more disturbing movie on every level than A Clockwork Orange. It may not have as much nudity as Clockwork Orange, but tonally, you feel dirty watching that movie. I don't feel the same way with A Clockwork Orange. I think even I'm not making mild of the rape scene with Mr. and Mrs. Alexander, but Kubrick does it in such a stylized way.
Oh, he
And of
does.
course, the choreography of it and Malcolm McDowell singing in the rain, it just doesn't hit in a way that I feel this is a real rape scene taking place. It feels like a rape scene staged for a movie about a dystopian future.
Yes,
And
and he creates his own world in a way that
and it's
few
very
films have
colorful
ever done that.
too. It's very colorful too. It's taking place in this ultra modern house, and so it's not in like some back alley or it's not underlit or it doesn't have that sleazy sort of unsettling quality that movies that even let's say Salo has, where Salo has so much more than A Clockwork Orange ever had, but Salo also feels so horribly real and so decadent, and so Salo feels evil to me. And I
I
know,
agree. No,
uh,
and it's in a different category in terms of its explicitness, but I also think it's not a very good movie in many ways, not just ways that would be considered objectionable to certain people. I mean, A Clockwork Orange, I think, is a comprehensive masterpiece, regardless of its controversial aspects. So, for example, the fact that the movie takes place in this highly stylized world that has never actually existed already makes it masterful. And it's incredible to me the audacity that Kubrick has to open the movie, to begin the movie where the weirdness of his world is apparent to you, and there's no gradual getting to know the world. He puts you in it. He puts you in his crazy upside down world, um, right from the very first frame. There's no, slow walking into it or taking baby steps into it.
I mean,
And I think
the production design to Clockwork Orange by the other John Barry.
yes,
I find it so funny that his name was John Barry as well. Is stunning.
it
It's
is.
staggering how good it is. And the Kurova Milk Bar, because if you read the Burgess novel or you read Kubrick's script is just an example of minimalism.
That's
I
right.
mean, Kubrick will write, they're in the Kurova Milk Bar, and then he would write out the dialogue. And I think when they were on the set, from what I hear, they didn't adhere to Kubrick's script that much. They went back to the book all the time, and they all carried a copy of the novel around with them, and they were using that mostly as the screenplay text. But the production design of the Kurova Milk Bar, like the opening of pulling out from Malcolm McDowell's
Yes,
face, and more importantly, his narration on the track right from the very beginning is pulling you in into his confidence of this character and befriending the audience
that's
and
right.
saying, it was me, that is Alex, and my three droogs, and you feel like you're going on this great adventure with him, despite all the evil and the rape and the sadism.
And there's a sense that anything can happen. And I think that maybe, I'm just speaking for myself, but one of the reasons why it might make certain people apprehensive, or why it made people, when the movie originally came out, especially apprehensive, is because the movie is so aggressively its own thing. It's not holding you by the hand and walking you through like at a gradual pace. Right? Even before we get to the first shot of Alex, the music is presented in an off-kilter way. The title cards are presented in an unusual way. Every aspect of this film is aggressively outre, and I think that that might explain, especially when it first came out, why it startled people. They weren't expecting something like this, and there was nothing really to compare it to. I'm not talking about things that have imitated it. That doesn't count. I'm talking about, did anything exist before Clockwork Orange that existed in this hyper stylized but also hyper sexualized fantasy world? Um, it's arguable. Maybe there were a few things, but it's certainly a very um, aggressively idiosyncratic vision.
Oh,
And
totally.
and you can't, as an audience member going into it for the first time, you can't predict where you're going to end up. Because even just the way that people are dressed, right? Where
Yeah.
their sexuality or their inner sexual thoughts are presented on the outside of them is
It
very destabilizing.
the the costuming and the hair design is
Yeah,
so ultra, in terms of the film. And almost every woman who isn't like the young girls in the record bar and not Mrs. Alexander's wife all wear wigs, colorful wigs,
that's
like
right.
purple wigs and yellow
So basically,
wigs.
it's
And
exactly how we live now in everyday life. But I mean, then, then it
I,
was very
I don't know how
strange.
they're doing that in Toronto these days, but I was obsessed with that eyelash on Alex's eye. I mean, I think I used to like try and draw it on my face or something. But this is what I'm saying is when Malcolm McDowell as Alex starts introing the movie to you, he's making you complicit, and and he's taking you on his adventures of the night, and he's saying, "Come along with me. It's going to be fun.
That's
You're
right.
gonna
He's amoral
you're gonna
too, right? That's the thing that
yeah,
makes it also, that's I
not
think what
only amoral but very cultured. very
Correct.
very he
He's also innocent, by the way, at the same time. That the funny thing is he's at
yeah.
once the height of perversion and the height of naivete and innocence. That
Well, he
combination,
skips out of school. He skips out of school, yet he's quite well read, and he's into Beethoven,
yes,
and while at the same time he also listens to the more pop kind of music of the time. But he's he's a psychopath for
he
sure.
is. Yeah.
I mean, and almost too smart for the system. And he's robbing and stealing. You see his drawers full of cash and watches, and he's got these nude illustrations on his wall of the woman with her legs spread. So he doesn't care what his parents think. He locks his door. He's got like that safe lock on his door or something. His parents know almost nothing about him because they tell him to go to school in the morning. He goes, oh, I've got a headache. I'll go when I'm more awake, and which causes the probation officer to turn up at his house.
And by the
Oh,
way, the
one
oh,
thing
go
I
on.
wanted. Sorry. One thing I wanted to mention. Watching it again recently, and I have seen this movie at least 100 times. I'm amazed at how much influence this movie had on Terry Gilliam's Brazil.
Oh, for sure.
But I never thought of that before because Brazil is also very cartoonish in a way. A lot of these wide angle lenses used, a lot of these wide angle shots like Clockwork Orange does. You've got the women wearing all the wigs, the colorful wigs. It's an authoritarian government that's obsessed with criminality. There's so much in Brazil that feels like plucked right out of the Clockwork Orange, except it's almost gives itself more permission to be blackly humorous, whereas it's slyly blackly humorous in Clockwork Orange. But I'm definitely, from the start, from the first time I saw it, picked up the hyperrealism to a Clockwork Orange.
Yes, for sure. And I would also say that Stanley Kubrick was always a satirist in one way or another. Every one of his films, including Spartacus, which is probably his warmest movie in some respects, it nonetheless contains moments of dark humor, including when the aristocratic Romans are talking about mundane things as people are killing each other in front of them for their entertainment, right? They just couldn't care less. And there's many other examples too. Anything, well, not anything, but many of the scenes involving Peter Ustinov's character and Charles Laughton's character um, are satirical in nature. Um, but in many of his post Spartacus movies, he's just an overt satirist. But he
Yeah.
always found new ways of expressing his satirical ideas. And he developed something that I would call a self-consciously alienating lens. So just like you have concepts like the male gaze, I would say that his gaze was self-consciously alienating.
It's
Um,
interesting with a Clockwork Orange because Stanley Kubrick likes his nudity
yeah.
and he likes seeing naked women on screen, and he puts them into situations in Clockwork Orange that you would not ordinarily get away with, or have a studio who was out of his hair for the most part say, well, do you really need at the scene in when Alex is recovering in the hospital and to have the doctor nurse fucking in the next, behind the curtain, and you're hearing the sound contrasted with Alex moaning, and then the nurse comes out and her breasts are hanging out,
Yes.
and you're looking at that scene going, now, personally, I'm not offended by it at all because it seems very much in the tone of what Kubrick is doing with this movie all the time. But anytime he has the opportunity to have a woman be naked in The Clockwork Orange, he goes for it.
Yes. And that's part
And
of
that
what I said
includes,
before, where he's creating a world where sexual impulses and sexual ideas more generally are externalized in various ways.
but I think it goes
Whereas,
beyond that with Kubrick. With Kubrick, I think he just liked nudity.
no, that's possible
And,
too. But the
and
thing
it's, I
is,
mean,
if you contrast A Clockwork Orange with his next movie, Barry Lyndon, basically you have the exact opposite approach. So everything is under the surface in
but he still
Barry.
managed to get nudity even into Barry
No,
Lyndon.
that's true, but I mean, generally speaking, the
And
sexual impulses and ideas are beneath the surface in that movie. It's
well,
the opposite in A
I don't
Clockwork
think
Orange.
he should have to justify it either. If that's the world or that's the images that he sees in his head as a filmmaker and wants to present.
Of course, he doesn't
I
have to
mean,
justify it.
I mean, there you can look at certain Kubrick movies, and in fact, the scenes where their sexuality or rape or anything sort of sexualized, he goes for it. Whether it's Eyes Wide Shut, his last movie with the big orgy and all the women walking around. And if you look at all the Kubrick movies that featured nudity, which were quite a handful of them, starting into I think it started with A Clockwork Orange for him. They all feature a very certain body type too. Kubrick likes these sort of tall, athletic-looking women who don't have enormous breasts for the most part. They're slender and very attractive. But there's a if you see Eyes Wide Shut, I mean, all the women without their clothes look the same. And there's even a moment in Eyes Wide Shut where, and I can only believe he did this purposely or thought we wouldn't notice, but at the party with all the masked naked women, this one woman comes out to Tom Cruise, or she's on somebody else's shoulder, and there's a cutaway to Cruise, or there's a cutaway to something, and when come back to it, it's a different woman there because her nipples look different on the breasts. And Kubrick was such a perfectionist that I can't believe that he would have let that go by if he wasn't trying to make some kind of visual point with it.
That's an
And
interesting point you bring up. Although I will point out that in Doctor Strangelove, there's a typo in the expensive, overtly artistic title sequence. So anything is possible. But no, I get your point. And by the way, I'm referring to the part where it says the title card that says base on the book instead of based on the book.
oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so you can never
That's
be
one.
sure. You never know when something's an
Well,
error.
there's a big difference between the guy who's doing the typesetting on the titles and you miss that versus bring in the other actress now. You know, and I read about also, and I didn't know this until I read about it, that during the rape scene with Mrs. Alexander, Kubrick went through two actresses prior to that in the scene because the first actress couldn't handle it being like thrown around by Warren Clark, who plays Dim, on his shoulders, and then another actress also found it, I don't want to say abusive, but too traumatic for her to do it. And finally, he had interviewed Adrienne Corey. So she was originally interviewed for the role, and Kubrick wanted her, but she didn't want to take her clothes off and be photographed at an audition. She just expected Kubrick to see her body on the day and be okay with it. And so he went and he hired two other actresses. But when they either left the production or he wasn't satisfied, he went back to her and he said to her, "What if I don't like your body when you take your clothes off?" Which is such a bizarre thing. And she said, "Well, then you'll pay me and I'll leave the production." And apparently he liked what he saw and they both very much enjoyed working with each other. And did not feel, she wasn't intimidated by doing the scene. She thought everybody handled her respectfully, although Kubrick took way too many takes. But she was okay doing it, and she wasn't somebody who turned on the movie later on in life. It's amazing how many in this day and age, how many actresses who were in these movies doing these provocative roles have turned on the movies and said, "Well, I shouldn't have done that,"
Well, it's part of the
like Olivia.
zeitgeist. If we were living in the 1960s right now or the 1970s, you wouldn't have that phenomenon. There are periods of censorship, self-censorship, sometimes hysteria, whatever the case may be. They come and go. So, at some point we'll have another decadent
Well, I mean,
sociocultural experience.
unless something really untoward happened to these actresses on set, and they were exploited in a way, where they didn't feel they could do anything about it. But I don't know, like Olivia Hussey when she came out against Romeo and Juliet and against Zeffirelli. I wasn't there on the set, and I forget what the issue was. She didn't feel she should have had to have done some nudity, and she was made to feel uncomfortable. But you're taking on the legacy of this film that's beloved by so many people, and you're just sort of assassinating it in a way. It was the same thing with Maria
Because the
Schneider
culture,
in Last Tango
arguably,
in Paris that we
yeah.
discussed. And recently, I saw a video of Ashley Judd sort of renouncing Kiss the Girls. And I worked with Ashley, and she was a lovely person and lovely to work with. But she, in the same video, she acknowledged how important Kiss the Girls was for the success of her career. But she now feels very uncomfortable with a film that turns sexual violence into entertainment.
Yeah, but that's
Sexual violence
because
toward women of men into entertainment. And I did kind of want to say, but Ashley, you played such a strong character, and the whole movie is about you dealing with trauma and fighting back. And so many women saw you as a sort of model case against sexual predators. And you've turned this whole thing upside down. Not to mention that women are like the number one demographic for watching true crime documentaries. What's that show, Law and Order SUV or whatever it's called, or I mean, all about sex crimes. It's horrible subject matter, but people are engaged by it, which doesn't mean that they get a thrill out of it. They want to see good win over evil in these situations, and I mean, it's a form of watching a horror movie or a terror. It's tension and it's conflict, and there are real people in this world who want to do ugly things to other human beings. And because there are movies about this where it's Seven or it's Kiss the Girls or it's whatever recent serial killer film is out there. I mean, there's hundreds of them. I don't see it as exploitation of women.
I don't
Women are
either.
more just more naturally vulnerable in society because they don't have the strength, and because a lot of men will sexually lust after them, but cross the line and do hideous things. It doesn't mean that that shouldn't be subject matter in a movie
No, of
that is
course not.
handled responsibly.
I
And I
agree.
don't think the movie Kiss the Girls handled anything irresponsibly. I don't even think there's any nudity in Kiss the Girls, and you certainly don't see the two serial killers doing their stuff to the woman. You just see them in captivity and being dominated, and that is very much the story. But I don't know, it's just we're in this period, like you said, where everybody feels they have to renounce something that they were
That's
in
right.
if it was even slightly transgressive. And I love the fact that Helen Mirren still won't attack Caligula. So
Yes,
like
but
I
but
did
the thing is, I think
you
each
know
of these cases that get brought up have to be looked at on their own terms first and foremost. However, my overall observation is that there are certain social trends that are responsible for certain individuals coming out and denouncing movies that they never previously had expressed any issues with. And again, we'd have to look at every specific case of someone renouncing a movie that they were a part of to get the most comprehensive and accurate information out there for people to look at themselves. But it's just my observation in general that after the Me Too movement or during the Me Too movement, people went overboard. It was a hysterical phenomenon. We have them throughout history. The Salem witch trials. Now we have anti-Semitism and pro-jihad crazy people running amok. And by the way, it's often radical feminists who are at the forefront of cheerleading the Islamists, which makes no sense whatsoever. It's a schizophrenic position to take. So I don't take seriously many of these, what I call hysterical sociological phenomena. I find them very
but
disturbing, but
but it
I
does make
don't.
it more difficult for filmmakers
Of course it
today
does. Of course.
if
No, it's a
all the
problem.
leading actresses buy into this.
Of course it's a problem.
And suddenly they don't want to participate in anything like that anymore, especially not with a male filmmaker. And they're the ones who have all the clout. So,
Which is why we're talking about this in the first place, because I share your concern. What I meant when I said that, I'm not concerned about some of these things in a certain way, the certain way that I'm referring to is in my own head. Meaning, in my head, intellectually speaking, I have no problem with delving into the dirty aspects of human nature. Um,
And interestingly, over the last couple of years, Mikey Madison, Emma Stone have won Oscars in the lead roles for playing roles like this.
yes.
And it's the equivalent of them having done it 30 years ago and renouncing those performances, saying they were misguided or whatever reason. And I shouldn't have done as much nudity and I shouldn't have done this and done that. And hopefully they don't do that. But it's interesting because there are many actresses who did these roles who haven't come out and renounced them so far. Like, let's say Barbara Hershey, who did many of these sort of provocative sex scenes, or even there's this movie that's getting re-released by Warner Brothers now on Blu-ray called Last Summer, which was a very controversial movie. And it's probably one we should talk about on a further
It's a great
podcast.
movie.
Yeah. And she did Boxcar Bertha, and she did so many of these films. And so I would be heartbroken to hear Barbara Hershey come out and go, I couldn't get anything better than that, or the director wanted to do it that way, and I wasn't on board, or Julie Christie renouncing the love scene from Don't Look Now. I don't think they would do it because they were artistically made, but then so was the consensus that Romeo and Juliet was artistically made. And another one was Brooke Shields. I'm friendly with the director, Randall Kleiser, and, she was okay doing The Blue Lagoon until she wasn't okay doing The Blue Lagoon, which was just recently. And it's, even if it is the case that you felt uncomfortable while doing it, then the movie has entered the popular culture. And to wait 20 or 30 years and then renounce the movie, I just feel you're like breaking something that's important to people and
It is, but the joke's on
rescinding
them because
permission.
the art is going to outlive their renunciations. The art is going to outlive them. So it's all a waste of time also at the end of the day. All it does is it destroys the social fabric of society a little bit, or a lot, depending
You know,
on the circumstances, because
and
we have nude paintings going back hundreds of years. They're masterpieces. They're not going anywhere.
and then
There's so many works of art that we could
yeah.
play this game with. It is just a silly game, but it's also part of the sort of totalitarian efforts of certain bad actors to exert their influence on society. Whether it's, a disgruntled academic with a chip on his or her shoulder, or it's a failed artist who grows up to be a dictator. It doesn't really matter. The point is, society is full of people who are, chronically dissatisfied with various things, and art lives forever, and it's going to outlive people's superficial resentment. So yes, I think we need to stand up to the people who want to censor or self-censor works of art. But the
It's
good
interesting
news
with a
is the art
clockwork.
wins in the end.
Yeah, I mean, with A Clockwork Orange, I don't know if I've read too many denunciations about it because it's Kubrick, and Kubrick is, as a filmmaker and an artist, he exists on the uppermost shelf, and I think he's kind of untouchable. But if you slapped another director's name onto Eyes Wide Shut and you re-released it today, I think it would take a lot of heat for the nudity and the orgies and the male gaze. I mean, let's face it, Kubrick had the most male gaze of male gazes. And to deny that is ridiculous, as I've said. Whether it's The Shining and the woman getting out of the bathtub. I remember when that came out in South Africa, it was censored, and they put like a cloud of light in front of a pubic area. But they were okay with the rotting corpse in his arms,
Yeah, of course.
part of that. So Kubrick, behind the veil of this high art and one of the most respected directors of all time, I'm convinced that he enjoyed nudity in a film and loved looking at the female body. And his work, while being satire, and I don't think particularly raunchy. I'm just stating that Kubrick liked nudity.
Yeah, that's one
And
thing. But in relation to A Clockwork Orange, I think the movie is a satire on groupthink generally. And then
oh
that
yeah,
extends to how totalitarian regimes police people's sexuality, police people's religious views, morality, education, on and on and on. The movie is basically satirizing anything and everything that relates to society as it existed at the time that the film was made. So there's basically not a single major social institution that is not satirized in the movie. And really, this movie is an antidote to our increasingly illiberal Western world, which is no longer about protecting or preserving the sanctity of the individual. The movie's primary concern, you could argue, is that it doesn't want people to lose the ability to think for themselves and to choose to be good or evil. Right? That's maybe the central point of the movie or
what's it?
argument of the movie.
What's interesting, with that concept is by the end of the movie, the Ludovico technique is considered a failure because Alex has tried to kill himself, and those super left-wing group that were trying to discredit the government in this program get exposed. But and Alex goes back to being his same old rapey, creepy
Yes.
criminal self. But there was an additional chapter in the original Burgess novel that Kubrick did not use or only discovered late in the process and then didn't think it fit with the style and the message of what his film was. And that is Alex is still a thug by the end of the novel, but then he comes across, I think it might be Pete or Georgie, who has reformed himself and is married with a family. And Alex looks at that and is desirous of having that life and makes the decision that he wants to reform himself and thinks it'll be a challenge for him to live the straight and narrow life. But the novel ends on a more optimistic notion
It
that
does.
the
Yeah.
human spirit or the human nature will ultimately side with morality to some degree, especially as you get older. And Kubrick ends the movie in a way more cynical manner with Malcolm McDowell's Alex basically back to the psychopath.
And not only that,
And
in Kubrick's film, basically everyone is corrupt. Maybe the exception in the movie is the priest.
yeah,
That's
well,
it.
I think Kubrick himself said he thought that was the most moral character in the film.
Yes. The prison chaplain, by the way, he's that's what he's specifically.
And it's
But
interesting, it's interesting because the notoriety of A Clockwork Orange really originates from the first 20 minutes of the movie. So the first, I don't know what it is until he's arrested. And that's the scene where people have modeled the costumes and it's the most stylized of the film. And then you go into the prison section, which I find a fascinating section, even though Kubrick still manages to give Alex these fantasies, which brings back the nudity and the violence.
yes.
Um, and then, so it's really a very precise three-act film. It's Alex as the psychopath, catting around with these druggies at night, doing all these crimes. Then Alex's time in prison and time being subjected to the Ludovico technique. And then Alex being released and people that he has done wrong getting retribution on him,
Yes.
ending up with him trying to kill himself and turning back and being brought back. The movie never explains how he's deprogrammed, but he's back to normal, being Alex the Droog again. So it's interesting that people really focus on the first third of the movie, but the following two acts are very intriguing as well and very comedic. And there's some fantastic acting and challenging still, like what they do to him with the eye clamps and the clips they're making him watch, and then when they have the demonstration where the guy comes on stage and like makes him lick his shoe, and then they bring on the semi-naked woman and all he can think about is wanting to rape her until he starts to feel sick. And watching what was the name of the prison warden? Not the warden, the head guard, who's fantastic in the
One of my
movie.
favorite character actors, Michael Bates.
Michael Bates, watching his expression. I mean, Michael Bates practically steals the middle of the movie.
This film
And
contains some of the greatest satirical performances or caricatures you could call them of all time. You've got Michael Bates. You've also got Aubrey Morris as Deltoid. I think his performance is
yeah,
extraordinary. And you've got Philip Stone as the father. And there's many other. Oh, Patrick McGee is the writer. Patrick
Patrick
McGee, holy
McGee.
shit.
I,
Like talk about going through the talk about chewing the scenery, but like in the best way
And
possible.
David Praz, who went on to be Darth Vader, at least
Yes.
in body. And no, it's a fantastic cast,
And
and
actually, those performances are another example of why this movie couldn't be made today to some extent, because you wouldn't be able to make a movie of this kind that plays in theaters all over, like in the multiplexes, let's say, that is this aggressively eccentric. You couldn't have a Patrick McGee performance and an Aubrey Morris performance and a Michael Bates performance left, right, and center in your film and make it one of the top 10 highest grossing movies of the year. That's not going to realistically happen in today's environment. Even, you could actually argue that the hyper stylized satirical nature of the film is what would make it harder to be made today than any of the let's say taboo sexual content, which is also a problem for today's snowflake audiences, or whatever you want to call them, brittle audiences. But the other thing too that would make this movie very controversial today is that it's a satire on the type of morality police that are now running the academic institutions and
yeah,
various governmental institutions. But let's just stick with academia. The Ludovico technique is basically what young people are now subjected to in academic institutions and at all levels, from K-12 to then, the post-secondary arena. They are always being brainwashed, subjected to questionable notions of morality, encouraged not to think for themselves, just like Alex is told it doesn't matter what he may or may not think or how he feels about things, as long as he's a good brainwashed zombie, the state is happy. They don't care if he loses his individual will. And that, of course, is encouraged in today's academic
I like the way that in Clockwork Orange, Kubrick takes shots at both the left and the right, right?
Yes, everybody, of
Um,
course, because this movie,
um,
and that's another lesson. This movie is not adhering to any political ideology. It is an individual artist's hyper subjective view of the world, and everybody is a target. Anyone and everybody. Yeah, that's how it works.
yeah, I mean, it basically says you can't trust the left or the right,
That's right.
and the moment one of them is in power, they'll be sure to fuck your lives up. Now, when A Clockwork Orange first came out in the US, it was rated X. And I think it played for a few weeks under the X rating. And then Kubrick himself withdrew it and made a few cuts to it. And then it got released as an R. And apparently, the cuts that he made are in the sequence where Alex takes the two young girls home from the record store and has sex with them. And I think they cut a couple of, I mean, it was like 10, 5, 10 seconds out of that sequence, or not even that. Maybe it's a matter of frames. And that, to my research, was where the difference between the X and the R came from. And it's interesting that that sequence, Burgess, despite the novel being not very explicit, but Burgess presented a far more extreme, shocking version of Alex, because Alex is only 15 years old in the first section of the novel, whereas he's 17 in the movie. And clearly the two young women that Alex takes from the record store home and has sex with in the movie are of age, but in the book they're as young as 10 years old. So he's he's a really sort of way more extreme character, and Kubrick understood that because he cast Malcolm McDowell, who I believe was about 27 years old when he cast him as Alex, he couldn't go for these super young looking
Yeah.
girls in that scene. He thought it would put everybody off. And as it was, the movie was extraordinarily controversial because of scenes like those. And according to Malcolm McDowell, I think it was him who revealed this. The speeded up sex scene to the William Tell overture was actually shot as one 28-minute. I mean, they shot it, I believe, undercranked, but it was one 28-minute choreography of what they were doing. And it's quite humorous to watch how he brings the girls into the room and then you see him romping around with them on the bed, and then he's finished with the one girl, so she goes and gets dressed. And then he finishes with the girl in the bed and goes and undresses her again. And the other girl's getting dressed. And he goes over to her and
It's a
undresses
great
her. Like,
playful moment.
yeah, it's very playful. I mean, I guess technically within the movie they're supposed to be underage, but they're not. They look like definitely fully developed women and who probably were 18 or over. I do recall the one actress, probably the one who does one of them not have any lines because apparently she's not credited in the movie. And at one point, she wanted to change her name because she didn't want her father to see her in the movie, but then she ended up not actually getting a credit in the film. And I wonder if that's because she doesn't speak.
I'm not sure about
Um,
that.
yeah.
But
So we shouldn't talk like A Clockwork Orange landed in 1971 and was embraced as part of the new Hollywood and everybody was cool with it. Even Roger Ebert despised the movie and came out against it. And I believe Pauline Kael. I mean, it was a target on Kubrick's back, and people were outraged by this movie. And Stanley Kubrick himself withdrew it from the UK market because there were imitation gang rapes and things that were getting blamed on him, and he felt too much of a responsibility.
and the irony is
So,
today you have industrial scale grooming gangs in the UK, and no one seems to care who's in government. But they
because they're
made
not
such a
quoting A
commotion.
Clockwork Orange.
Exactly. So there you go. So the movie's actually prophetic in that way too, because now we actually have, rape gangs roaming the English countryside, and also, of course, the cities as well.
The
Um,
other thing that sort of occurred to me is A Clockwork Orange is a very white film. I don't think there are there any people of color in the film. I don't recall. So it certainly would not be made the same way. In a sense, they would do a more for sure diverse
well, also
casting
the
on this. But
demographics have changed considerably. The other thing too is the movie, just like the book, is a satire on the misuse of language, the way that young people will create their own slang and basically bastardize the proper language, so to speak. And of course, we've got a lot of that going on today where people are proud to boast about how ignorant they are of anything and everything, including language.
yeah,
And that was also very prophetic on Anthony Burgess's part. And that's why, of course, he draws upon James Joyce to create his own made-up language using puns disproportionately, um, and other
it
interesting
also
literary
feels
techniques.
very Shakespearean. I
It
think when
is,
I
yes.
hear
Yeah,
the
no,
language, like a little bit like Richard III too, with the narration.
for sure.
But
But
Alex
Joyce above
definitely,
all,
yeah,
and also he was a huge fan of James Joyce. Like he wrote works on James Joyce's works. So that's interesting. But so it's actually one of the most Joycean movies ever made, but it's also one of the most Kafkaesque and Orwellian movies ever made. This movie, if I had to sort of say like what are its literary precursors beyond Anthony Burgess himself, I would say Kafka and Joyce smushed together. Kafka because there's no end to the institutional corruption. You can't get to the end of it. You don't know where it begins, you don't know where it ends. It just seems to be a cycle of corruption on display, which in many ways is true to life. Um,
which is one more reason why I think it's so similar to Brazil in
It
so
is,
many
of course.
regards.
Well, Brazil's even more overtly Kafkaesque for sure. Um, and also Brazil has a. It's interesting though because Brazil, in terms of its color palette, is very dark, right?
Yeah,
And A
yeah.
Clockwork Orange actually takes the opposite approach, which is very interesting. A Clockwork Orange is actually more avant-garde in that respect, because just like The Shining is, right? Because you would assume that a dystopian uh, story like Clockwork Orange would be represented in a dark, shadowy way, and that's not at all how it's presented. It's a bright, guilty world, to quote Orson Welles' film The Lady from Shanghai. And I
It's
also
very
think,
colorful.
yeah, it's a very colorful world as well. But even just the sheer amount of white backgrounds in this
Yeah.
movie, it's quite extraordinary. And maybe that's his way. I don't know. I'm just speculating here, but maybe that's his way of just saying, like, I want to show you exactly what is wrong with society. I want to get it right in your face. I don't want to hide behind shadows and,
Or he wants to make it palatable
yeah,
while critiquing it.
that's right.
And and you know what's interesting about A Clockwork Orange for a movie made in 1971 that was futuristic, it still doesn't feel that dated to me. The
No.
only aspects that kind of come off dated is that uses these little micro cassette tapes where we're in the digital era. But then
Well,
again, people are
if
going
this was a
back.
Terry Gilliam film, then he'd be doing that anyway.
But people are going back. I agree. I agree with you. But it's been quite a few years since Brazil, anyway. But people are going back to tapes and records now,
That's
so
right.
even that fits in with what you're seeing on the screen. But the costumes and John Barry's production design and the color, the color schemes and the music, while classical, the original Wendy Collis compositions are very modern and
And it's,
using
yeah,
synthesizers and distortions and the
right from the
opening
very first frame.
the opening piece of music, which is Wendy Collis's arrangement of Henry Purcell's music for the funeral of Queen Mary, is one of the most
It is.
evocative pieces of music that just sucks you in, but is a super modern kind of
It is.
distorted futuristic track that would be considered even postmodern by today's standards. And
It's even a
it
precursor to what the Sex Pistols later did, because it's basically taking something that is usually presented in a reverential way and it's bastardizing it, right? It's again,
and
that's the recurring theme throughout the film, that works
and
of
the youth
high art are being reduced or vandalized in some way so that they're something that's inferior or ugly, because people don't appreciate culture. And that's, by the way, another prophetic aspect of this film, right? If Anthony Burgess thought that things were bad in the 50s and 60s, then, what would he say about today's world, where people don't care about the past at all, generally speaking, of course. There are individuals like you and me who do, but I mean, the school
yeah
systems,
I
for example, in the Western world, they're teaching their kids to hate their respective cultures, and they don't even teach them the actual histories of the respective cultures and societies. They don't know anything that happened.
and then on the that's on the left, and on the right they're completely erasing the history of slavery and the civil rights movement. So again, the left is pulling in that direction, the right is pulling in this direction. People in the center are getting pulled in both directions.
Yes.
And somehow we always manage to elect the two extremes. And I think A Clockwork Orange is a very political film at its heart. And I think it's making maybe that point as much as anything else in the film. It's certainly not a film about crime and punishment.
It's a film
It,
that transcends politics, like all great works of art, but it makes political statements in roundabout ways, which is, I think, the
and
best way to do it. Because if
getting
you,
back,
yeah,
no, sorry, finish your point.
no, I was just going to say that if you just make a naked political statement, it's going to date very badly, relatively speaking. But if you can express your viewpoints that may have a political underlying theme or something of that nature, it will probably last longer. And a lot of people don't understand that either today.
I guess Kubrick could direct A Clockwork Orange again today if he had, let's assume he hadn't made it and was still around, because his brand and reputation as a director was kind of singular. But I think he would take a lot more heat based on the nudity and the rape scenes and the first 20 minutes in that movie, despite it being a certain political and satire and Kubrick trying to make it as engaging as possible, because we're not supposed to enjoy watching those scenes. When the whole idea of film is to put you into different worlds, different experiences, show you different subject matter, we're no longer, based on certain people's opinions, supposed to derive any enjoyment from movies that present horrible situations or conflict or violence against humans. I mean, who even said that going to the movies is necessarily all about entertainment? It doesn't. I don't know that you go see Clockwork Orange to be entertained. I certainly don't know. I go to be captivated and to see an artist's point of view on how he sees the world and to be challenged and provoked. I don't know that I throw that all in the tuna can of entertainment.
I agree with you. It's not a good idea to box any work of art, in a very strict way. We should be very malleable when it comes to our labels of films and novels and any other work of art. But the thing is, I also think it's important to realize that the artistic realm is a place where anything potentially can happen, and that's healthy for a society. It's healthy for a society to have an artistic realm where ideas can be explored and experimented with without actually having direct real world consequences. Although there were copycat crimes committed as a result of people seeing this movie, but sometimes that's just the repercussion that you're going to have to deal with and be strong enough to deal with. It shouldn't deter you from making a controversial film or something that is going to be considered transgressive.
No,
So I think we've forgotten in the West what it means to be an artist, and we're reducing the artist to a political pawn rather than a person who's supposed to advance idiosyncratic ideas through his or her work.
but
And
it's
I
not
think that,
even today. It's not even about reaction to the art. It's that you can't get it through the system to make it because everybody is self-censoring and everybody is afraid to step on anybody's toes
yes,
and
but
everybody is
also
afraid to
unlike,
be attacked on Twitter.
correct,
And that
but
all
unlike,
translates into, well, then we're going to lose money.
correct, but it's even worse because if you look at academia at any level, they are now on the side of the political correctness, the woke mob, whatever you want to refer to them. They're illiberal, put it that way. They're basically crypto fascists. Doesn't matter whether they identify as left wing or right wing. In, of course, the vast majority of cases today in academia, they're going to identify as leftists. But that's because they don't know historically what the left used to be. But beyond that, in the 60s and 70s, there were many academics who would have stood up for a film like A Clockwork Orange if a
Oh,
government
yeah,
was banning it.
absolutely.
Yes, so
Yes.
when people banned A Clockwork Orange, there were academics and critics in the popular press who stood up for the film. Today, that would not be the case as much. You would have many academics and popular critics defending the bans, defending the censorship, or trying to cancel the film and being the censors themselves. So that's disturbing. And that's
Or
why I'm saying,
the reaction to these films would be so extreme by the fragile people watching these things.
Yes.
What's interesting is there is a clip of my film Running Scared on YouTube that is the pedophile scene where Vera Farmiga is called to this apartment where her young neighbor, who's a 10, 11-year-old boy, has been abducted by this pedophile couple. And she goes in and she rescues the child, and she ends up executing the pedophiles basically by the end of the scene. And if you read the comments section on this particular YouTube clip, which I think has a couple of 100,000 views already, post after post talks about how that scene ruined their childhood. And they're kind of saying it in a I don't know, I don't want to say a positive way, but in a way that this movie impacted me.
Yes.
And I saw this movie way too young. They're saying I saw it, maybe my parents brought it home, or I watched it, when I shouldn't be watching it, or I watched it when I was 12 or 10 or whatever it is. And I don't know if I remember much about the rest of the movie because I was so young, but I remember this sequence, and it has never left my mind. And it almost like, as the artist reading these comments, I am sort of this mixed opinion of, wow, did I really fuck up that many childhoods of these people and cause these kids, because they were underage probably, who saw this movie to have nightmares? But at the same time, I thought, that's pretty cool, because there were movies that I saw at that age that were formative and impacted me and are still embedded in my psyche to this very day. And
that's actually healthy because it makes you a stronger person. It makes you a stronger person so you can deal with life instead of just,
But what I took away from reading all these comments is, for the most part, a lot of them, without coming out and saying it, kind of valued having that engagement with the film at that age, because of how disturbing or frightening to them it was. So the art itself, the point of that scene had impact. It landed. And that scene, while it's harrowing, shows no abuse towards children.
That's right.
They're more disturbed by the plastic on the floor, where many of them think is hiding bodies under the floor, but it's really to prevent blood and staining the carpet. And they're more disturbed by the ratings on the movies they make. They have these DVDs based on how much they enjoyed killing these kids. I mean, it's really fucking twisted, I'll admit that. But it's those things that, and the colorfulness of the playroom. In fact, there's quite a lot of a Clockwork Orange influence in Running Scared, in especially how transgressive the film is and its approach, without actually, I mean,
and you establish a heightened reality that's all your own.
Yeah, and it is a very heightened reality film. So like A Clockwork Orange, which presents this very unique universe, Running Scared has this Grimm's fairy tale template, and I think that's part of the reason why it's so disturbing to young audiences, because it very much is the Hansel and Gretel house, and those stories passed down generation after generation until it lands in Running Scared as sort of like a template or a satire of it, still have power. And as a filmmaker, you want to be free to make powerful images. Now,
yes,
I could never watch Salo again, but boy, did that movie burn a hole in my brain. I don't know if it was, I don't particularly think it was a positive hole, but I remember that film. There's nothing worse than sitting down to watch a movie, and this will be more prevalent as you get older, trust me, where you think this movie sounds interesting. And as soon as you start watching it, you go, I have seen this movie. There are echoes that come at you, and I have seen this movie, and I remember that scene. But the thing is, the movie is so unengaging for the most part that you've forgotten it. You will never fucking forget A Clockwork Orange after seeing that movie. You won't forget The Exorcist. You won't forget Last Tango in Paris. These are movies. You won't forget Jaws. These are movies that are distinctive, and art is distinctive, and it's challenging, and it's offensive at times. and it's glorious and it's all these things. And all of that is slowly weaned out of the films we watch today. And you
It
see
is.
what's on Netflix, and it's the same fucking garbage over and over. It's not particularly well filmed. It's bland. It's, I mean, I don't know, how can you not be angry and scream in the wind against what is happening to courageous filmmaking? And of course, we need financing to make these movies. And people are afraid to finance them. They're afraid they won't get distributed. They're afraid there's going to be this big TikTok backlash. They're afraid of being villainized. Filmmakers don't want to be seen as these horrible people. You're very limited, and there's a huge amount of ageism in this business. So as you get older as a filmmaker, people forget that you were fully capable of making a film, a dynamic film, when you're in your 30s and 40s. Suddenly you're expected not to be able to do that, which is bullshit, because Scorsese and Spielberg and Ridley Scott, they all prove it every time out that they still have the chops.
And it was always that way to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, you have to look at every individual filmmaker's career, but there are many filmmakers from the golden age of Hollywood who I think have either a great final film or a great penultimate film. So, for example, Joseph L. Mankiewicz's last movie was Sleuth, and I think it's a masterpiece. And I think
Yeah.
Alfred Hitchcock's second last movie, Frenzy, is also a masterpiece. And I could go on and on. There's many examples. So people should always just evaluate an artist on his or her own terms first and foremost. Don't try to lump the artist in with some more general ideology. Art is something that is supposed to transcend boundaries. It's not supposed to be something that is contained like the genie in Aladdin's lamp. That to me is a very silly idea, and it's also a dangerous idea. It's also interesting to me that a movie like A Clockwork Orange today would offend people, maybe even more than it offended people when it came out, and people would be angry that it merely existed if it came out today. But at the same time, they're okay going in the streets and chanting for jihad. Like there's something very perverse about what's happened to society, and that's all I would argue anticipated, if not outright predicted, by both A Clockwork Orange, the film, and its source novel. The other interesting thing I just wanted to point out is that this movie has a great moment where Alex is subjected to Hitler and his, I guess it's from one of his propaganda movies, like the Nazis marching all in line for him. And when I first saw the movie and that came on the screen, I was repulsed because to me, the grandson of three Holocaust survivors, Hitler and Nazi iconography chills me to the bone. That's the visceral impact that it has on
Yeah.
me. And so, just like, for example, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, whenever they show a swastika in any way, it also really hits home. Like there's a moment in Raiders of the Lost Ark where um, one of the transitions is like we just open on this Nazi flag and then the camera pulls out. And to me, that speaks volumes, you know? And I'm worried that today, young people are going to either have no visceral reaction to that iconography, or some of them will actually be happy to see it. And that's really
Yeah.
disturbing. Including, by the way, Islamists who come from cultures that aligned with Hitler during World War II. The Grand Mufti tried to kill the Jews, for example, and spoke out against them and did horrible propaganda against them. Um,
Well,
so
the fascinating thing is, if they were making A Clockwork Orange today, and Alex was being subjected to the Ludovico treatment, you would expect them to show images from the October 7th atrocities, but they wouldn't, because they don't want to recognize this fucking barbaric behavior, this insane, murderous rampage. They'd be more inclined to show, and of course, it's unfortunate that there was a lot of innocent people who were collateral damage, but they would show like the ruins of Gaza, or they would show images of that. They would not show in a contemporary movie, unless it's made by the Ellison Studios, I guess. The October 7th footage, just like
So Kubrick predicted all of this because he understood, and Burgess too, they both understood that morality can be easily inverted to suit the needs of various people who are in power or want to be in power. And like you said, this is an equal opportunity film. It goes after anybody and everybody. It doesn't matter what their political persuasion might be, how old they are, their gender, on and on and on. All that stuff is irrelevant. The movie holds up, you could say, a funhouse mirror to people not behaving properly. And it's also interesting too, because when you see the character Deltoid, he sort of is a pervert in the movie.
he's a total pedophile.
Yeah, and so the thing is, that's all never spoken in the movie, right? It's just implicit.
Oh
And it's
yeah,
done in a
yeah.
very original way. Like I've never seen it quite done that way before. But the point is, his abuse of his authority is implicitly shown. It's never outright stated, which is very
It's
interesting.
actually almost done it. It's almost done in a comical way
It
because
is.
he ends
No, it
that scene
is.
by taking the glass with the false teeth,
Yes.
and he's drinking from it. And then we're watching him. We know he's doing this before he's conscious of it, and it's grossing us out. And then he finally realizes what's happened. But I think the entire message of that scene today would be overshadowed by the fact that the guy is a pedophile, who's grabbing Alex's crotch, as opposed to the fact that Alec has been busted for truancy
And
and
yeah,
how he's
and the
trying to
funny,
manipulate Deltoid. But
correct.
Deltoid is part of the problem too. The whole fucking
That's right.
system
And
is
that's why,
corrupt.
and that's just one scene. There are many scenes like this throughout the film where, in a multi-layered way, the film is dissecting everything that's wrong with society. So in that particular scene where Deltoid's in Alex's room, or sorry, that's not Alex's room, it's his mother's room because she has her teeth in the
Yeah.
glass. But the thing is, so everything that Deltoid is saying outwardly is correct, right? In other words, all the lecturing that he's doing is correct, but he just happens to be a pedophile. So, right? So even though he actually is telling Alex all the right things that he should behave himself, Deltoid himself it doesn't behave himself, right? So there's so many ironies wrapped up in that scene, and it's so brilliantly executed, conceived and executed. Um,
And the book is also a little bit autobiographical because Anthony Burgess's wife during the Second World War was raped by some American GIs while he was away, and she had a miscarriage, and she was never right after that. So, and part of Burgess writing this book was almost like because he was a religious man, he believed in forgiveness, and he wanted to. I think he was trying to exercise himself of all this toxicity in his life and put it out there. The art was almost therapeutic for him, but in a very in a not in a very but in a slightly optimistic way. But Kubrick's movie was more cynical about that. And while Burgess was quite complimentary about Kubrick's film, he did opine the fact that Kubrick did not use the last chapter because I think that brought the full sense of faith in humanity into perspective, which was not in the movie.
correct. Which is interesting because I still consider the film to be optimistic in a weird way because the movie's very existence makes me optimistic because the fact that an
Well,
artist could get away with this.
the film has had enormous staying power. This
Yes,
film came out in 1971. It is number 120 on the Internet Movie Database all-time best films. That's amazing achievement for a movie from 1971. It's had like almost 1 million ratings on IMDb, which only the most popular movies that have become culturally impactful, like Pulp Fiction and The Godfathers and all those films, rate up there. People still dress like droogs on Halloween. I see them all the time. I didn't have this when I was a kid, but I would have killed myself to have it. But I even have an Alex the Droog action figure. I think it's from Japan that I have on one of my shelves in my office, and the detail on it is amazing. Even his stick opens up and reveals the knife,
Oh wow,
and
that's detailed.
uh, yeah, I mean, Clockwork Orange has permeated the culture, and even people who haven't, younger people who haven't seen it, know about it,
And that's how it should
and they
be.
know it's a
Young people
notorious
should,
film.
exactly, young people, it's healthy for young people to want to get a taste of the transgressive. And that's why both the book and the movie have been popular with young people for decades.
And it
Um,
is a youth story, right? I mean,
it
Alex
is.
in the book is 15. In the movie, he's like 17, although McDowell was older. But it is a youth in trouble, dystopian, sci-fi, morality tale. It's all of that. It's always been fascinating, and it's served up in this delicious packaging. It's amazingly colorful. The soundtrack, and Kubrick was so smart to go with so many of these classical pieces. You know, that was the soundtrack to Alex, the Droog, and Wendy Collis did a fantastic job with arrangements or the pieces that were already recorded. And this is a fun little bit of trivia. I'm not. Did you know that Kubrick originally wanted Ennio Morricone to score the film?
I didn't know that.
And I think that would have been fascinating. And Morricone talks about it. And what happened was Morricone told Kubrick that he was just finishing up the score to A Fistful of Dynamite. But Kubrick decided to check himself if Morricone was going to be available, and he called Sergio Leone, and Leone told Kubrick he wasn't going to be available. He was still working on his film, when clearly Morricone could have done it because he was pretty much just at the mixing stage of A Fistful of Dynamite. So Morricone was really upset by that, and he said, it's the one movie that I never got to score that I wanted to do, that he had the opportunity to do it. And I could completely see how Morricone's avant-garde music could have fitted into A Clockwork
For
Orange, but
sure.
all things turn out the way they're supposed to. And the Wendy Collis soundtrack, I mean, it's one of Kubrick's best soundtracks. It's a
Yes.
phenomenal soundtrack,
And even just the ironic use of Singing in the Rain is
which
brilliant.
Malcolm McDowell said he turned up at a party where Gene Kelly was the one night, and Kelly totally snubbed him because he hated the fact that he took like his signature song and used it in such a violent and
Yeah,
traumatic scene.
I can imagine why he might be offended by that, but I think it was a
Uh,
brilliant idea to use it.
yeah, and I think we've. Oh, and I wanted to mention in the record shop scene, Kubrick is not above having a meta moment by having his own soundtrack to
Yeah,
2001
2001.
on the
Yeah.
shelves, which you would have thought was a beneath Kubrick, but there definitely instances where I think it's Dirty Harry, where during one of the shootouts, Clint Eastwood has "Play Misty for Me" on the movie theater marquee. There's this whole history of filmmakers incorporating their previous work into the frame at times. But
There's one other
I
thing I
also want,
wanted to, oh, go on.
yeah, no, I just wanted to say the coordination between the production design and the costume design and all the technical departments is just wonderful in the movie. There's when they're in the warden's office, I'm always mesmerized by the fact that the warden's shirt and his shirt cuffs match the orchid in the background. It's this like beige colored orchid, which I think it's an orchid or it's some flower. But the attention to that kind of detail is consistently there in the production design with these there's always these circular lights, these bubble looking lights in almost every scene. It's a wonderful out there vision of a dystopian world, and the film will be around a lot longer than we will, that's for sure.
Well, that's the idea behind art, right? An artist creates art possibly because they want to achieve some form of immortality.
When I first started watching this film, I was 13, so I was way younger than Malcolm McDowell. I am now so much older than his character in the movie, and I see all the different characters that, well, that guy's probably younger than me now. That prison warden's probably younger than me. I mean,
Yeah, that's
I have
weird how that
literally,
works.
yeah, and it'll happen to you too. But my entire teenage and adult life has had this movie be part of the fabric of it. And it's one of the few movies where I can actually quote you the dialogue, And I could probably quote you every scene in this movie in order, because Kubrick basically blew a hole in my brain. And what was the last point you wanted to make?
Yeah, and by the way, I feel the same way about this film and a number of his films, Doctor Strangelove and Eyes Wide Shut and The Shining, Spartacus. I rewatch his films very often. He's one of my favorite film directors. Um, so I can remember where I was at any point in my life because every year I rewatch these films. So just wanted to point that out. But my last point that I wanted to make was that 1971 had an awesome level of diversity in terms of content and stylistic innovation. So if you look at the movies that were nominated for Best Picture that year, they included A Clockwork Orange, but they also included films like Fiddler on the Roof, The Last Picture Show, French Connection.
Wow.
And by the way, my favorite film of that year, which is The Hospital, written by Padachevsky, which is another visionary satire. But the point is, each one of these films, the ones that were nominated and Diamonds Are Forever, the Bond film that we both enjoy, each
Yeah,
one of these films, and there's many others that we could name, they're totally different tonally, aesthetically,
exactly. Yeah,
thematically
distinctive.
speaking. Yeah, exactly. Like how much further apart could you get, between The Last Picture Show and A Clockwork Orange?
And
Like,
you know what's interesting? The Last Picture Show, A Clockwork Orange, and The French Connection were considered low-budget films for their time. Kubrick was working with a very limited budget on A Clockwork Orange, despite the fact that it does not look low budget at all. I mean, most of what he's
I
shooting
agree.
is on real locations. The Kroger Milk Bar was a set, and I think Mr. Alexander's I want to say it's his bathroom upstairs might have been a set, or the possibly the room where he jumped out of the window. And I think there was one other set, but the rest of them were just found locations, and Kubrick shot the shit out of them. But so was French Connection. French Connection was a very low budget movie. Obviously, The Lost Picture Show was. Fiddler on the Roof was not. And what was the other movie you mentioned?
Well, I mentioned The Hospital. That wasn't a Best Picture nominee, but
The
it's the same year. It came out the same year.
Okay, okay. And The Hospital seemed like it was a medium range budget. I don't think it was a super low budget movie. But interesting how when we think of A Clockwork Orange today, we don't necessarily think of it as a low budget movie. It doesn't feel like a grungy independent film with a handheld camera because, it takes time to block and light and create stylized shots. And
Correct.
Clockwork Orange is nothing if it's not style.
Yes, but also I should point out its style anchored firmly in substance. This is not
Oh,
a
yeah.
movie that you could say is style over substance. The style and the substance are married together in a very fleshy way. This is not a skimpy or flimsy or very thin movie in any way. This is a fulsome meal of a film.
But if I
Um,
walk down the street today, if I left my house in a white overalls jumpsuit, a bowler hat, uh, with an eyelash, I don't even need the eyelash. People would immediately go, "You're doing Clockwork Orange." I mean, it's like Batman going on in his Batman costume, you know?
Correct. That's right. I mean, yeah, I mean, I remember the first time that I ever was conscious of A Clockwork Orange in any capacity was because I saw a Simpsons Halloween episode
Yeah, yeah.
and they were referencing Clockwork Orange. Bart was dressed up as
And there was
Alex.
a and there was a Mad Magazine satire called a Clockwork Lemon, I believe.
Yeah, I
That
saw
did a
that.
great. It was a great job, but I think that's where we should probably end it. We've covered a lot of ground.
We
Probably
sure
going to piss
have.
off a lot of people, and some other people will go, "Hey, I love the refreshing honesty that we approach these films from," but I definitely do miss the flavor of a film like A Clockwork Orange being out there, and there's not much that shocks or astounds me in the same way that this film has done. Um, And that's why I keep going back to films like A Clockwork Orange and Brazil, and even Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys, and just films that present an audacious, deeply thought out, smart. The work of Ken Russell is someone else who I
Yes,
feel worked
definitely.
in the same idiom, whether it was The Devils or Altered States, a film I love very much. So many of the films that Ken Russell did, I think, also had that say Lithomania. They had that kind of
Yes.
operatic fever dream.
Or even Tommy.
Yeah, yeah. Tommy's a hard one for me to sit through, even though I want to always like it more. But it is definitely it's a crazy stew of ideas and images.
Yes. One last thing I'll say about Clockwork Orange is that it's a movie that shows us there are no boundaries in film or the arts as a whole. Anything can happen while you're watching this movie. And as an artist myself, I'm inspired by the film because it makes me want to go out there and make something that will show people a version of the world that they haven't seen before, or create my own world that reflects on the one that I'm living in. And it's not just the fact that the film is transgressive that I find inspiring, because it's a fearless film. I find the film inspiring because it doesn't resemble anything else in many ways. It's its own concoction. Nothing's a pure original, like I said before, but some things are more original than others, and this is one of the most original films, especially stylistically, I think, ever made.
Well, I'm glad that we have a Clockwork Orange in this universe, and I'm glad that I could now watch it at home on a 4K Blu-ray. But I'm also glad that I got to see it on like a seventh generation VHS the first time out, and it retains the same power no matter what format, what quality, what generation. It's a landmark film, and I hope people somewhere, someplace, somehow can make more movies like A Clockwork Orange. I'm certainly trying. And that does it for this episode of Forbidden Films. And we will be back very soon with another controversial, informative episode. And I look forward to joining you, Barry.
Same here. Until next time.